Hi, and welcome to the inaugural release of a brand new podcast you didn't know you needed, the Three View Mirror, where we discuss three different decades from three different points of view, and every episode bring up three different, seemingly unrelated topics that in the end we'll bring together for you. I'm Gen X Jono, John Catrides. I can be found on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all across social media, talking about all things Gen X. And I have two amazing co-hosts. I'll start with you, Shell. Introduce yourself.
I am Rochelle O'Black, and I'm better known as Gen X Shell across my social medias as well, including Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and in general, just always hanging around.
I'm Chris Clues, better known as Chris Clues, and I'm a keynote speaker. My keynote is everything I needed to know for life and work I learned from 80s pop culture. I'm also author of the book series, The Ultimate Series on Essential Work and Life Lessons from 80s pop culture. And I am over 50, never married, no kids. So yes, I'm the Gen X stereotype rule breaker.
That is awesome. Well, let's get to it. We do have a sponsor we would be remiss to forget to mention. It is the amazing website and social media platform, mega superstar. Do you remember? Chris, let us know a little bit about who's sponsoring us today.
Yeah, our friends at Do You Remember, they're a global community made up of millions of people who are passionate about nostalgia and pop culture. Do You Remember inspires readers to share memories, reminisce, and step back from the fast-paced world so they can relax, smile, and feel good as a daily goal. Don't be a neo-maxi Zoom dweeby and follow or subscribe to Do You Remember today. They're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
All right. I started the intro by saying that we're going to bring three different, seemingly unrelated topics. Now, these topics are only known to whoever's chosen as the moderator that week. So this week, Shell and Chris have no idea what I was going to bring to them. And at the end, we're going to take a couple minutes and see if they can figure out why I picked those three topics, how they touch one another in appropriate ways only, and see if maybe you guys can figure it out as we go along. And like the title of today's podcast, those three things, in a very specific order, because the orders we're going to talk about them, are Pop Rocks, Phil Collins, and a Gerbil.
Oh, no.
I cannot wait.
Oh, no.
This will be great.
So we're gonna dive right in. The first one, Pop Rocks. So to me, like the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s were filled with. It was more important what candy, what snack food, what the junk food we ate tasted like, looked like, the marketing behind it. Nobody gave any thought to the artificial colors, the artificial flavors, red dye number 6, anything about what was in it. It was just, I mean, I think even our vitamins were bad for us. Flintstones was riddled with artificial flavors and colors at the time. What were your favorites?
Well, I was partial to Wilma, I'll tell you.
I liked a Betty.
Betty. Yeah.
Oh, you boys would like Betty, wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
But as far as candy, like what was your go-to? What was it that you remember like fiending over or that we couldn't get away with today?
There was a lot of candies, I think, that were back in the day that were, I don't see them anymore today. I was just talking about this, like the chunky bars or the icy chunky bars. We used to have the cowtails. Did you ever have the cowtails? I know they still sell them in some places, but no.
Was cowtail licorice? No.
They're like a caramel of some sort.
Really?
Or yeah. Do you remember the Chicka Sticks?
No.
No.
Where the hell did you grow up? I'm talking candy, cigarettes, and Pop Rocks and Jolt Cola, and you're giving me cowtails.
Oh, I cannot believe that you don't know what a cowtail is. Chicka Sticks, they had like a coconutty outside of them, and we got them every year at Halloween time in our trick or treat baskets.
Chris looks so confused.
I'm just thinking about the candy cigarettes.
Yes.
They would never be able to get away with. And Big League Chew.
Big League Chew.
Like, and then Big League Chew turned into like this little can. It looked like a skull can, but it was actually bubble gum, and you would pinch it and put it.
We thought we were so cool with the boys all had the cans. You're right. I forgot about the cans because the girls all enjoyed having the different brands, so to speak, of the candy cigarettes. And we thought we were cool smoking our candy cigarettes.
Yes, and there were two different types. Cigarettes came in two different varieties of candy. We had the candy cigarettes, which everybody talks about. But I remember, the gum cigarettes, but there was the candy cigarettes too. And I think a lot of people will remember one and not the other. The candy cigarettes were hard and you could snap them and chew them. And then there was the paper wrapped gum that you could blow on, and the powdered sugar would make it look like smoke.
I
That's right.
completely forgot about those. Yes, you blew out the powdered sugar.
Yes.
Oh,
Because they
it's
had to
nothing
simulate
like
smoke.
play acting.
So
Well, there's
bad.
nothing like play acting you're smoking of a cigarette
So
when you're
bad.
8 years old. So
There's no question that Big Tobacco
No question.
manufactured that candy. No question.
No question. Indoctrination. And I'm convinced they also sponsored our art classes because they had all of us unapologetically making ashtrays in the 3rd grade in art class.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, mine was so bad, by the way. Can we, we're talking about gum and what's bad for you candy-wise. Can we talk for a second about the 700-year-old stick of gum that you would get in a baseball card pack? That could not have been good for us. It was like you could break it.
You could break it.
It had to be bad. Yeah, it had to be bad for us. And just powdered sugar all over it.
I loved it, though. It's like Bazooka Joe gum. That was hard as a rock, too.
when you said 100-year-old stick of gum or whatever, I'm thinking of the one covered in purse dirt, the half a stick of Freedent that your mom would give you when she dug it out of her purse. And she's like, oh, here, honey, here's some gum for you. And you're like, wow.
Did you say purse dirt?
Anyway.
It's covered in purse dirt, right?
I love that. I've never heard that before.
Purse dirt.
Oh, that's funny.
I haven't either, but all the lint and everything that was in the bottom of the purse.
Yeah, your mom could dig in there and like just with one hand and dig in there and reach out and know exactly what she was giving you.
What were those wax liquid things too?
Remember the soda
those?
The soda cans.
Yes. Yeah.
Little soda pop wax bottles. Yeah.
Like, what were these?
Well, I think I've talked about it with you guys before. Did you eat the wax?
I was just going to say there's only two types of people, the wax eaters and the not-wax eaters.
Wax eater.
I ate the wax. Wax eater.
Wax eater.
It's the only way to get all the yumminess. They was stuck to the wax. So, okay, Philip Morris, absolutely, without a doubt, unapologetically sponsored candy cigarettes. Did the United States Dental Association sponsor Jawbreakers?
Oh my God!
Oh yeah, they would have had to.
The big ones too, like the giant extras. They can't fit that in your mouth. Like, what was that about?
I bet you could.
I'm not even going there.
Chris, you're a lovely shade of red.
I'm not going there. We're going to be talking about gerbils later, apparently. So.
That's not the connection.
But the gobstoppers too was gobstoppers. Yeah, they were like the ones that were hard as well. No doubt that the Dental Association sponsored those candies.
We used to eat Fireballs all the time in high school, and we would keep the little paper. I know the girls did, and you pulled them in and out of your mouth all day long.
So the big Fireballs, or there was the movie candy version that were the little ones, and I would pop like 15 of those in my mouth at a time.
The little ones, the girls had to suck on those a little bit more daintily, I guess you could say.
The Fireballs?
The Fireballs. We would just take the little paper and suck on them a little bit all day long.
But you couldn't.
Okay, this is going in directions I can't allow. So, what was it the Astro Pop? Was I the only one that, speaking of sucking daintily on something, we would work the tip of that to the point that it...
You could stab someone.
That's where I was going, but then I heard myself and had to readjust. It would be lethal. But yeah, so you guys did the same thing with the Astropops. They would be really, really sharp tip.
Oh yeah, like impalement. Like you could impale somebody if you wanted to with one of those things.
That's too
and to
funny.
just get off the things that we were sucking. How about the dots? Were they called dots?
I forgot the dots. On the paper.
And it was, I mean, to me, like, I'm from Maryland, so I love steamed crabs, but it's a process. When you sit down to eat steamed crabs for dinner, it's, you have to understand, like, you're going to have to go through a lot just to get these pieces of meat out of the crab. The same thing with those dots. Like, they were this big, and you're having to pull them off the paper. And how many do I have to eat to actually feel like I've gotten my sugar?
And I was nowhere near as careful. Yes, I consumed as much paper as I did candy. Easily.
Because I didn't care how I pulled those off of there. If there was paper stuck to the back of it, oh well, you know.
Yeah, so be it.
Oh, you boys
So on
probably
top
made
of
spitballs with
candy,
the paper afterwards.
on top of candy, we also had like junk food in the realm of like sodas and stuff. Now, I'm a Rochester, New York native. I grew up in Rochester and Buffalo, New York, and Rochester, New York released a soda, and I'm not sure how widespread it was, but do you guys remember Jolt Cola?
Absolutely,
Oh,
I
yeah,
do.
100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you guys remember their slogan?
No.
It was either all the caffeine and twice the sugar, or all the sugar and twice the caffeine. And they were all about it. It was like Vibrant tablet. It was our Red Bull. It was our energy
Yeah.
drink.
I guess it would have been because I remember drinking it in high school, and I remember all the I think it was double the caffeine, if I want to remember correctly. Because I mean, you would have one of those, and you would literally be shaking if you weren't used to the caffeine.
And it was delicious. I mean, I had it during. I drank it during college. To your point, it was our Red Bull, the Joe Cola, and it was a hell of a lot better than Tab.
You know what? I was a Slice fan. Do you remember Slice?
Slice.
I remember Slice.
Yeah.
Slice Apple. It was the 7-Up version of the Pepsis and stuff. I distinctly remember the Pepsi challenge because anywhere you went, you know, you had to do the Pepsi challenge, of course. You know, Coke/Pepsi, and we can't even get into that argument here. We'll lose half of our audience.
You know, it's
Almost
funny
exactly
you mentioned
half.
Slice because that's so funny you mentioned Slice because how about like our slang and our language and our lingo, and we started calling each other Slice.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that
Home
there was
slice.
this drink Slice, and then eventually it's like,
Home
what's
slice.
up, Slice? Home Slice. Like
Home
it's
slice.
just that's what I love about pop culture. That's what I love about all the things that we talk about is that you have this product Slice, and then you have a completely different interpretation of the word that comes into the vernacular, and kids start using it.
Well, and it's funny because we talked about Jolt. And Jolt was, like I said, they said twice the caffeine, all the sugar. And then something happened, to Shell's point, as Pepsi Clear, Crystal Pepsi, whatever it was, Crystal Pepsi. They started getting away from the artificial colors, started marketing away. And 7-Up's slogan for the longest time was crisp and clean with no caffeine. Never had it, never will. And there's the guy that gave the ho, 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 ho at the end. But today, kids don't know what 7-Up is. It was the preeminent clear soda of the time, and Sprite crushed it somewhere along the line.
Right.
Yeah, it did. I have no idea who the manufacturers of those are. They crushed Slice. I mean, Slice is, you know, I remember Mandarin Orange Slice was like absolutely my favorite. Yeah, or Apple Slice. And they were incredible. All gone.
Yeah.
But
So I think the lesson we can take away from this segment, though, is for the most part, when we were growing up, nobody gave a damn about how healthy what we were ingesting was. We didn't hear about avoiding gluten. We didn't hear about the dangers of caffeine. Anybody that had an issue with red dye number 6, I mean, or the blue M&M that had to be pushed away finally, nobody cared. And I don't remember anybody suffering because of it. And I'm not pretending that gluten intolerance isn't real. I know people that are sick. I'm not pretending peanut allergies are real. I'm not that idiot. I believe those things are real. I'm just saying that growing up, I didn't see it. Nobody cared about what we were eating.
No.
Yeah, and we talked about the sodas, and we didn't even bring up 64-ounce slushies and Slurpees and the big gulps that like were invented basically in the 80s and maybe the 70s, but I'm pretty sure the 80s because we did everything so much bigger in the 80s. I'm imagining that's when it happened. We haven't even talked about a 64-ounce slushie and how much sugar is that on top of the brain freeze that you get.
All right. So I'm going to move us on to our next topic because this one will run a little longer. 80s era music, specifically Phil Collins. When I was a kid in the 80s, it seemed like every other song on pop radio was Phil Collins. It was either him by himself or him with Genesis or him doing the soundtrack for the Tarzan movie. You couldn't get away from him. Every other song was either Studio or I Don't Care. The man was just a genius at putting out music that even if you didn't like pop music, you know every word to his songs.
Yeah, he was definitely a cultural icon of the day. I know that Chris probably knows a lot more about Phil Collins than I do. I had different 80s music idols, I would say, than Phil Collins, but he was so pervasive and so there. Maybe that's why I didn't attach to him too much. It was like it was too much.
Yeah,
Were you more Depeche Mode and The Cure? Is that what I'm feeling?
I'm thinking
Well,
more
no,
Metallica.
yeah, I had a much harder taste in music in the later portion of the 80s. Now, the early 80s, more elementary school, was like your Cyndi Lauper, your Michael Jackson, your Boy George, Culture Club, a lot of the big pop artists of the
Mhm.
day. But Phil Collins definitely loved a lot of his songs, but I think he might have been too pervasive for me.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting about Phil Collins is so much of his music. I mean, it was pop music, but people don't talk enough about the messages that he would put into his music. And I think that's what was really interesting about him is that he was able to kind of balance putting out poppy music and also having this like very like high level message, not something simple that people like Land of Confusion, for example. You know, you listen to that song and you look at the music video, there's a lot going on in that song. There's a lot going on in the lyrics about world politics, geopolitics. And that usually when somebody approached something from a message level, particularly in the 80s, it was more apparent. It was just simpler to get your hands around, like Peter Gabriel, Red Rain, for example. Those were songs that were just easier to get your hands around. But I just want to digress for a second because I'm always fascinated by people who can play the drums and sing at the same time. I don't know how they do it. Like Phil Collins, like how do you do that? How do you play the drums and sing at the same time? It's really.
I don't
think
know.
the
I
same
can't
thing
walk and
about
chew
playing
gum
the
at the same
piano.
time, so.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, and he was the drummer. So Land of Confusion was actually a Genesis hit. And that's the thing.
Oh, that's right.
He
Genesis,
was so, but people make that mistake all the time because he was the front man for Genesis after Gabriel left. And they'll hear songs like I Can't Dance or Land of Confusion or Mama or Illegal Alien. If you listen to the song Illegal Alien by Genesis today, there's so many things that a lot of people would find problematic about that song, starting with the fact that those were the words we used back then. But yeah, he started as the drummer of Genesis, got promoted to the frontman before the album, and then there were three. But that's why his music was always out there from both sides. And to your point, Chris, I think there was an article I read once where he's credited as saying his pop music sold the album, which allowed songs like his more heavy stuff to be on there and get the message out. That's just the way it is. A lot of those songs were really deep. And the last thing I'll say on it is he brought entire horn sections to his music. I mean, so many of his albums it was big music that we didn't hear really from anybody else that was hitting the pop charts that often.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really that didn't occur to me, but you're right. There was always the sound of a horn in a lot of his songs. Saxophone too, right? I mean, I'm trying to recall, not being the biggest number one fan, but saxophones and trumpets and things like that in the background that gave it a different flavor than the day.
It was very.
I played the alto sax. I played the alto sax in middle school. Yeah, that was what I chose. I chose that instrument because I thought it was so cool because I had heard it. It was prevalent in 80s music, the saxophone. Not as much.
I played the alto sax in middle school.
Oh, you did?
I played the alto saxophone.
Come on!
No way, really?
You're joking.
I still have mine.
No way.
It's in my closet. Yeah.
That is hilarious. No, my mother put an end to it. She's like, no, I don't want to hear this. She made me quit.
I moved on from the alto saxophone when I got lazy in high school, and I decided I was going to play the baritone saxophone, and then I only had 3 notes anytime. It was a do, 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 and that was it. And I got lazy. I didn't want to practice my music, so I switched to baritone saxophone.
Yeah, I got lazy and decided I wanted to be popular, and that's why I left.
Did it work, John?
No, it did not work.
It did not work.
Not judging by those pictures that you post of yourself in high school.
So Rochelle was listening to a harder edge in the 80s. What were you listening to, Chris?
I was listening to everything. I mean, honestly, if you look at my category of my catalog of music, it was all over the place. It really just depended. I do want to mention Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight. I mean, for most people, like that was their introduction to him through Miami Vice.
Yes.
And Miami Vice, the soundtrack, that's really what I miss about the 80s. Is my music tastes were all over the place. Everything from LL Cool J to Metallica to even like, Young MC. But I listened to a lot of Depeche Mode, The Cure, The Smiths as well. I was literally all over the place. And I think a lot of that goes back to the fact that I was a movie person like I am today. And the soundtracks in the 80s were incredible. Bands like the biggest bands in the world and the biggest musicians in the world were fighting to get on soundtracks because that was an opportunity for them to have another revenue stream. People bought the soundtrack, the album, they got money from that. And today it's very, very different. And so you go back and you look at some of these soundtracks from Fast Times at Ridgemount High, The Last American Virgin, Less Than Zero, and you go look at those soundtracks and you're going to be shocked at how many bands and musicians and solo artists are on these soundtracks. You say, wow, how could you have all of these people on the same one? And that was where a lot of my music came from.
Footloose, Dirty Dancing, Vision Quest. It goes on and on and on and on. And Stranger Things, actually, I think part of the popularity of the show Stranger Things that came on was not only that it brought back a nostalgia of the 80s, it had its own soundtrack. Same thing with the movie Guardians of the Galaxy. Popularity brought on, I think, in part because they had soundtracks.
I love the soundtrack of that movie. And speaking of like buying the albums and such, I know when I grew up, we didn't have a whole lot of money. And so I know in the early portion of the 80s, a lot of times the only thing that you listened to was what they chose to put on the radio, because I wasn't out there buying maybe I got one or two cassettes for Christmas or something like that of my most popular radio person, because I think the radio dictated what we listened to a whole lot more. Whereas now it's like there's subgenres of everything and you could really specialize in what you listen to. But if you didn't have a lot of money, you weren't buying those soundtracks. You watched the movie and I would love to go back and look at those, Chris.
Yeah, go back, look. I'll give you one to look at, Less Than Zero. And I'm just going to name 4 bands or 4 musicians that are on Less Than Zero alone. There's about 15 of them. Megadeth doing a cover of Enagata Davida. You have Danzig, you have Public Enemy, and you have the Bangles. Just to give you an idea, like the Bangles did a Hazy Shade of Winter cover on there. And I think Public Enemy was Bring the Noise. I think it was Bring the Noise. I could be wrong. Oh, and also, just let me throw one more in there. LL Cool J, Going Back to Cali, is on that soundtrack as well. So, I mean,
I'm blown away.
Like, how do you compare that to anything today? I don't even know like what artists you could say could all be on the same soundtrack today. And that maybe I just don't know like how you do that ever again.
Was that Public Bring the Noise? Was that with Anthrax? Didn't they do that with Anthrax as well?
They did. I think initially they did it by themselves and then with Anthrax, because Run DMC and Aerosmith kind of created that genre. And there's a movie called, sorry, I'm like going crazy now. There's a movie called Judgment Night with Dennis Leary. Okay. That soundtrack, to your point, is all, and I think it actually has Public Enemy, Anthrax, Bring the Noise, but it's all rap groups paired with metal groups doing on the soundtrack. It's amazing.
Writing it down.
Yeah.
Awesome movie, too. Really good movie.
Yes. Really good.
So, all right, you guys stepped on something that I think is really cool. So, Rochelle and Chris, you both mentioned like the diversity that we find on albums, specific to you, Chris. And Rochelle, you're like, we heard what was on the radio and even taped songs off the radio. That's how we created, besides going to Columbia House, that's how we created our tape collections in a lot of ways. Anything free was for me. Today, conversely, you can create your own song list across any streaming music service and have a curated sound that is specific to what you like. And the AI within the platform, the algorithm, will feed you more music specific to what you like. But when we grew up, how many radio stations came in clearly where you grew up? 3, 4, maybe 5?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, one might have been adult contemporary, one was classic rock, one could have been oldies, and a couple of Kiss FM's the #1 hit music stations. That was every city across America. And you listen to what they pumped out. And to Chris's point on the soundtracks, you could hear Metallica, followed by Islands in the Stream, followed by Walk Like an Egyptian, followed by I'm Going Back to Cali. It was all different. And because of that, those of us that had money to buy were buying all different kinds of music because they were forced to be exposed to it, so that our top 10, our Billboard top 40, was all over the place.
Oh, and the fact that the 80s music was still one of the greatest, I still argue that 80s music was absolutely incredible. Such
Why?
a broad range, like you said, because there was such a broad range and there was
Yeah.
such a beat. And one of the things that we love to do, we danced. I mean, we danced and sang all the time.
The safety
to
dance.
this. And there was just more.
Yeah.
You felt the music more. I hear some of the music now, and I'm not knocking any of the music now, but it doesn't have that same hitting beat where you seem like you could just truly dance, just get up and random dance, not choreographed dances. You know, we're not TikTok dancing back in the 80s.
Friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, they're no friends of mine.
Well, and I mean, and we had dance shows, Dance Party USA, Soul Train, Bandstand. We had dances in school. I remember we called them record hops. I think our parents called them sock hops. But it wasn't just a prom when I grew up. We had dances, almost one dance every
All the
month. Like a
time.
different school organization would sponsor them. They would take the $2 at the door we all paid, and we had dances informal all the time.
Yes. Do
Same
you
for
remember
you?
the girl boy dance? Do you remember
Yes.
the like at arm's length girl boy rocking back and forth dance? Those were the best things I can remember, you know, and that's, you know, you were either a wallflower or you were out there with your little circle and somebody went into the middle of the circle. And
That's right.
you know, Footloose is a movie all about that kind of a thing, you know, wanting that freedom to go dance.
I was on the wall like Farmer Ted in The Geeks and 16 Candles.
I was both.
I didn't care. I was out there dancing. I didn't even know how.
That doesn't surprise me.
You guys mentioned, you know, not at all. I'm surprised you weren't on like, you know, the Dance Party
Neither of
USA.
those things surprise me about either of you.
I was so you were mentioning why, you know, the 80s music, and I talk a lot about this because somebody else mentioned subgenres, and part of the allure of 80s music is that I challenge people, go back to any month, any year in the 80s, any month, week, or year of the 80s. So June, second week of June, 1985. Go look at the top 40. You have something for everybody. It's literally like Depeche Mode next to Motley Crue, next to Christopher Cross. Throw in some Debbie Gibson. We'll add a Michael Jackson. And then just for, you know, good measure, we'll throw in Kenny Rogers. Like there was something for everybody. And that's the difference. Those subgenres that we have today, the 80s created those. You had a little bit of rap in the late 70s, a little bit of metal in the late 70s. And then what did you have in the 80s? 15 different types of rap and hip hop, 15 different types of metal. Bon Jovi and Megadeth, very different. Still
Very
considered
different.
metal, you know? And then you look at like Young MC and NWA or Public Enemy, like totally different in terms of their approach, but both considered hip hop. And that's what's fascinating. And I think, you know, we really grew up in a great time for music.
And speaking of the NWA and all that, you remember all, and the Shout at the Devil, Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil.
Shout at the Devil.
You know, we went through that whole, like, you know, music is bad thing at a portion of the 80s. And I can't remember those years. Chris, you probably know this better than I do. But there was that whole, like, adults think our music is bad because of NWA, because of Shout at the Devil.
So that, I'm glad you brought that up. That was the mid to late 80s, and that's when you had the Parents Resource Music Council or whatever it was, right? And they had to put the explicit lyrics. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was Tipper Gore, I think.
Tipper Gore.
It and some other
Which is ironic. It was the left. It was the left leading the charge to censor music back then. And not to put anybody labels on any political politics. It's not that. It's just look how it shifted. Now today we would find the more conservative side of politics having that voice. But at the time, it was actually Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, that led that. And to this day, I think it was Dee Snider. If anybody watching has not seen the YouTube of his speech in front of that congressional organization, master class level, you would never expect it coming out of him. Eloquent, to the point. The man, my jaw dropped. I just remember being like, I am a huge fan now.
And he's a great humanitarian, too.
Yeah, our heroes come from the most interesting places, because if you think about the free speech heroes we had in the 80s, for music, It was Duke Snyder, the baseball player, no, in the 50s. It was Dee Snyder, Twisted Sister, and it was Luther Campbell from Two Live Crew. Like,
Well,
these were the guys that got up there and said no.
Not just them, John Denver. John Denver said that if you throw a G-rated label on my albums, I'll never sell another album. He was against it from the other side.
Well, Ice Cube was just interviewed by somebody. I was listening to his interview, and I think it was Ice Cube, or maybe I heard something back in the day from Eazy-E, but when they put the explicit lyrics sticker on the albums, they sold more albums.
Yeah.
So they actually embedded the explicit lyrics into the cover of their albums moving forward. They said, you don't have to put the sticker on there. We'll just put it into the album cover.
We'll do it for you. That's right.
Yeah.
Because that made it off limits. That made it bad. And we were all teenagers and kids then, and we loved the idea that we were going to sneak something past our parents with that explicit lyric label.
Yeah.
Were we not supposed to have access to it? Were we not supposed to have access to it? Was it supposed to be like an R-rated movie where they were supposed to not let me walk into Jaws at 9 years old, and yet I did anyway? Or was it just a suggestion?
No, I don't air quote, because I think everything back then was a suggestion. It was all like, if your parents happen to be around, and if they happen to give a crap about it, then maybe we'll stop you from going into this movie.
But we'll take your money. Yeah,
we'll take your money.
Yeah, we're good with that. Yeah.
AC/DC, we'll give you the candy. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, God, let's not go back to that. The AC/DC is a great example because it was Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. My mom was like, what do you want for your birthday? I think I was 11. I'm like, I want Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap by AC/DC. She's like, okay. She didn't, whatever. She gives me the album. I'm listening to it. I get excited. I'm walking around the house singing the song, Big Balls. I've got the biggest
big
balls of them all. And my mom was like, where did you hear that? I'm like, oh, I was 11. Like, I wasn't smart enough yet to say I heard it somewhere else. I'm like, the album you gave me, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. She goes upstairs, takes it. She takes it from me. She's like, no more of this. I'm like, what? Then like a year later, a year later, she gave it back to me. She's like, okay, here you go.
Yeah, I can remember my dad was really lenient about certain things, like, yeah, you kids, you have to learn for yourself. You gotta experience these things for yourself. And I can remember asking my dad, we used to do something called tagging. And that was where we got spray paint and went and spray painted bridges and railroad trestles and whatever else. And I'd be like, hey Dad, I want to go spray paint. I'm going tagging tonight. And he'd be like, oh, okay. And my dad's digging through. Yeah. Oh no, I kid you not. And my dad's digging down through his cabinet. He's like, oh, I have this really orange reflective one. You can have this one. I'm like, thanks, Dad.
That's vandalism. There's a name for that, Shell.
It's vandalism. But our parents were like, hey, if you're going to do this, at least ask me first, and then I'll know what you're doing, and I'll know how to defend you when you get caught.
Did you have your specific tag? Your little shell tag?
You know what? I was never very brave with it. I think I would just go real small and in amongst the other graffiti and write something. And then I thought it was cool. But then it lost its luster too. You know why? Because exactly like the explicit lyrics, because somebody said, go ahead and do it. And then it lost its luster and it really wasn't fun anymore. And so there you go. I mean, lesson learned.
So we talked earlier about high school dances. And for me, there's certain songs in the 80s specifically that will always bring back certain communal memories. And songs like Stairway to Heaven. If you even begin to hear Stairway to Heaven, you have to remember slow dancing with somebody at some dance. And the song was like 11 minutes long. So that was the song. When you heard it, I was very deliberate about the girl I asked to dance to that song because it went on forever. And there were so many songs like that. And I'll just name two to start. Stairway to Heaven is one. And then there's a Dokken song, which maybe, Shell, you can help me with. Is it Alone Again by Dokken? That was one that I remember. And then the Scorpions had one as well. Those are at least three bands that I remember that were huge for slow dances.
The Winds of Change?
Yes, that's it. From Scorpions.
Yes, Winds of Change, yes.
And I think it is Alone Again. I'm Alone Again. Yeah, I'm not going to sing. But, with Dokken was one for me. Do you guys remember any specific song that brings back a high school dance memory?
Eternal Flame. Do you remember that song?
Oh, my God. The Bangles? Yeah.
It was the first song that I ever. That was also those songs. Remember when you could go into these little recording booths for the very first karaoke, record yourself singing thing, and then they would sell you a tape. They like had
Yeah,
stores of this at the mall or at amusement parks. That was the
amusement
very
parks.
first song that I ever did one of those too. Yeah, Eternal Flame.
Did you ever do one of those,
Mine
Chris?
jumping in that. Yes, I did. It was "Why Can't This Be Love" by Van Halen, and it was terrible. Like my dad somehow found it about 10 years ago and gave it to me at Christmas in front of everybody and made everyone listen to it. It was the worst thing. If Yetis have a mating call, that's what it sounded like. It was so bad.
I'll see you that, and I will raise you "Time of My Life" from Dirty Dancing. I did that with a girl that I was dating at the time, and it was very bad.
Oh my God.
I would have crawled if somebody had a copy of that tape for me. Luckily, I destroyed it years ago. That's why I'm not a singer here today.
I think like if I think about like the songs for me, it was like the couple skate.
Oh yeah.
So like you said, Eternal Flame, and it reminded me of the Flame from Cheap Trick.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I will be the flame. I think it was. I will be the. Yeah, I'm not gonna sing. Jesus, that's awful. No, I just. And I was more into like I thought it was so cool because I was more into like the R&B. So you had like Johnny Gill and Albie Shore. And,
Boys to Men.
Night and Day by Albie Shore. And then I got a hold of Enigma, and my mind was blown.
Last part of this segment. We all had the music that we told our friends we loved, the song that we would blast and we wanted everybody to know that we liked listening to. And then we had the songs that we would play in our rooms or on our Walkman when nobody was listening. The guilty pleasure.
Yes.
The song that you didn't really want anybody knowing that you loved. But let's put it this way. If you were in the car with a bunch of your friends and it came on the radio, you're like, oh, and you would change it. If it came on and you were driving alone, you'd belt it out at the top of your lungs. I want to know your guilty pleasures.
I know. The Meatloaf song, the
Paradise by Dashboard Light.
Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Absolutely. Like as soon as that song came on, everybody's like, oh, I hate that song. Me, I'm like, yes. I want to sing it the whole way through.
Oh my God. That's only 11 minutes too. That's no big deal. Mine is Sailing, Christopher Cross. Like, I was like, I love the yacht rock back in the day, but I would never have told my friends that ever.
Christopher Cross. Didn't you do like Laura's song too?
I still love the song Sailing. And I honestly today it's all about Kelly Clarkson, Since You've Been Gone. But I hear Since You've Been Gone, the windows are going up and I'm jamming out.
See, you mentioned Debbie Gibson earlier. You threw out Debbie Gibson.
I'm still moving on.
I totally thought you were going to say Debbie Gibson because you mentioned her earlier, and I'm like, how did he think to bring up Debbie Gibson? Right. Now, Shaw, I'm looking at my clock. We're at about
We'll come back to
yeah.
Okay,
We're
but
at
John
about
never told us his guilty pleasure.
Oh, that's right.
John
What's
said
that?
It, did he?
Hello?
Nope.
I'm sorry?
You never said your.
I don't want to.
Is it hello?
No, it's worse.
Oh my God,
I really don't want to.
Is it Dancing on the Ceiling? Dancing on the Ceiling?
Worse. Bette Midler, Wind Beneath My Wings.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
I know every word and every note. It just lifted me up. I don't know what to tell you. I had a girlfriend that dragged me to see Beaches, that horrible movie. I'm like, why would anyone intentionally subject themselves to this sort of movie? I can still see the little girl screaming as she finds her mother passed out on the floor. And when Bette comes out and sings that song at the end, I'm like, tears going down my face. And then every time it came on the radio, I couldn't help but listen to it.
What movie was that?
I knew you were going to say you
Beaches.
What movie?
Beaches? You've never seen Beaches? Oh, dude, you have to. You got to see Beaches. I mean, most guys that saw Beaches were dragged there by a girlfriend. It was an iconic movie that every girl in their 20s I knew saw it. But if you haven't seen it, just grab a box of tissues, put your manhood in your purse, and go at it. I'm telling you, you will
It
get
just
very in
doesn't-
touch with your feminine side.
I try to avoid movies that are named like Beaches, The Piano, stuff like that. Those are things that I try to avoid. But listen, I have a friend who I went to see Castaway with, and he started crying when Wilson was floating away. And
Okay.
and he
I
said,
can see that.
yeah. And he said, yeah, right. And he's like, is it wrong for me to cry for a volleyball? I'm like, no, dude, it's really not. Like, he's a very important character. Like, we're losing somebody we've been very close to for all of like 85 minutes. This is an important part of life here. Yeah.
Well, and getting back to Beaches for a minute, Shell, do you remember who played young Bette Midler and did an awesome job of it?
No, I don't. Because I haven't
It was
seen it in so
Blossom.
many years. I don't. Was it?
Oh, was it
Blossom?
really?
Oh, yes, it was. You're right.
It was Blossom.
Maya Bialik.
Yes,
Maya
it was a
Bialik,
very
right?
She's
young
great.
Blossom.
She's awesome.
Absolutely
Yeah,
amazing,
she's
and she nailed it. I mean, not to be overzealous about the movie Beaches or anything, but yeah, there's that.
Because you
All right, so-
already showed us, John, you already showed us how overzealous you were for this movie in the first place. I mean,
Yes.
tears and secret
Yeah,
songs.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
This I'm editing this particular video. This will never see the light of day. When this
Yes, it will.
Yes, it
Yes,
will.
when
Yes, it
when
will.
the finished product
Yep.
hits, it's going to be some AC/DC song. I'm going to hold on to my clouds.
We're going to bring this up every podcast, John. We're going to sit here and be like, remember that time John told us that Beaches made him cry and that
That's right.
Wind Beneath His Wings was a
It's going
song?
to come up every time. And we know full well now that at night you just put on Judy Collins' Send in the Clowns, and you just
I
spend some
didn't
time
see.
by
Now
yourself.
that's it. Dude, the fact that you knew that Judy Collins sang that says more about you than it does about me.
Because I did the solo in 7th grade. I did a solo Send in the Clowns in 7th grade. So there you go. In my choir with a mock turtleneck. So
See,
there
you
go.
can
That's
sing.
mine.
Oh, God. All right, so we talked about mentioning tears. And I think one of the first lessons young Gen X era kids, 70s, 80s era kids, learned about crying and about death came from our pets. Because everybody I knew, without doubt, more so then than now, everybody I knew had pets, diverse line of pets, whether it was hamsters or gerbils, cats or dogs. And we had a different relationship with pets back then. I remember our dogs were outside. We grew up in the country, but we had German Shepherds, and they had their own pen. And my dad took great lengths to insulate the doghouse. And the dog lived outside. That's just the way it was. Today, and we lived in upstate New York. It snowed, but you know what? The thought process was, this is an animal. It can survive outside. I wouldn't bring a deer into the house during the winter to survive. At least we're feeding this pet. But what pets did you have? Do you guys remember? I mean, was it common for dogs to be outside? Did you guys have small pets like goldfish that you killed on a regular basis, hamsters, gerbils? What did that look like for you guys? Why are you laughing, Shell?
Because we grew up on somewhat, my grandparents were farmers, and then we had something like a farmette, I guess you could call it, because I had horses, I had dogs, I had mice, we had cats, barn cats, and barn cats, they just lived outside, and they were fend for yourself every year. They would have litters of cats. The dogs, I can remember one of my duties as a kid was to go out and break the ice out of the dog's water bowl, because we also were I'm in Pennsylvania and it's cold. Break the ice out of the dog bowl and feed the dog and water the dog outside. Same with the horses, bust the ice out of the water trough, and of course they belong outside, but the dog was always out there.
Not for me. My family goes back to my grandmother back in the 40s and 50s. She was already doing rescue well before it was something that was kind of, talked about and done. So we had a lot of dogs growing up. They all lived in the house. They all slept in our beds. I have pictures of me with my first dog, Sesame, who always slept in the bed with me. She was, when we got her, I was 3 years old. My parents were like, what do you want to name her? And I said, Puppy. And they're like, no, she's not going to be a puppy forever. I'm like, how about Sesame Street? My favorite show. They're like, how about Sesame? So we landed on that. So yeah, and I had hamsters that escaped and ran around in the cabinets of our house and then died there. And we had to find them, and we buried them in Pop-Tart boxes out in the backyard. And we had funerals for them and everything. We had hermit crabs I had hermit crabs all the time from Ocean City, Maryland. I'd always come back with a few of those. It was cool when they like grew out of their shell and then they move into a new shell. That was actually pretty cool.
Where'd they get the new shell?
So yeah. So you would, when you got, you put it in there with them. You put a bigger shell in there with them so that then when they got big, they would move into the other one. It's really cool.
That's cool. See, educational and informative.
Those too. Yeah. And they're funky looking when they don't have their shell on. They're really,
they're weird.
They're very, they're strange. I had a few of those myself. And you were talking about burying things out in the backyard. And growing up in the country, you didn't see and kudos to your grandmother, by the way, for early rescue behaviors. I think that is absolutely beautiful and fantastic.
Agreed.
But, yeah, absolutely. Growing up in the country, we dealt with sick animals in very different ways. And this was sometimes the most humane thing to do was, getting a shotgun. I kid you not. I mean, that's what you did. You shot your dog if your dog went down. You know what I mean? And you buried your dog. And I can remember
you were Timmy.
Instances like that. What's that?
Wasn't it Timmy and Old Yeller? You were Timmy.
Oh, Old Yeller, and you're gonna tell me again, where the hell did you grow up? No, I grew up in the country.
No, so did I. Our backyard was a pet cemetery, and we would put a little wooden cross wherever I remember our backyard was. God, I hate to say it, but it was bad. I mean, if we didn't ever get our dogs from a pet store, but if we did, they'd be at the back of the cage saying, "Not me, take that one," because in the country. We had dogs that would get into it with other animals sometimes. I mean, things just happened. And we probably had no less than 4 or 5 pets buried in our backyard.
Oh, yeah. We had a bunch of them, whether it be the cats and, that didn't make it through the winter and that from the barn or whatever. That was a very commonplace practice.
I don't want to be buried in a pet cemetery. And I love the Ramones, by the way. That was another band I loved growing up, the Ramones. Who did Pet Cemetery. I actually also had sea monkeys. For those of you that didn't have pet rocks, I had sea monkeys. Yeah.
Did they work? So if you ever read I had sea monkeys twice. And both times that I ordered them, it was like sprinkling dust on the surface of the water. I know they were brine shrimp and they were supposed to do something. Mine didn't. They did nothing. I fell for it twice. And to this day, I am so hesitant to buy anything mail order. I'm like, nope, dust on water. You got me twice. That's it.
The ant farms would also get me too. They were supposed to
send about ant farms.
The ant farms that were supposed to build these gorgeous, beautiful network of tunnels, and meanwhile, it was 2 dead ants 3 days later, and you're like, "Aw." So, same with the sea monkeys. I would look through that little bubble of a magnifying glass on the outside of the container, and I saw nothing that resembled the little people with crowns on their heads.
Do you know the advertising? The advertising had a little thing on it, kind of like a disclaimer, but it was just an outright lie. It said you could teach them tricks.
Yeah, that's right.
What do you mean you could? What? Floating on their back is a trick? That's the only trick I knew. Coincidentally, so did every single carnival goldfish that had the misfortune of coming home with me.
Oh,
that was so sad. Looking back on those goldfish, man. It's just
what a horrible life.
Wait, now you're really going to question where I live because they still do that at my county fair. I kid you, and there's still a county fair, and they still have tractor pulls. And
we still have county fairs.
And they still do, yeah.
I mean, think about that poor
the goldfish.
The entire existence of that goldfish life is going from carnival to carnival, having little plastic balls thrown in your face, then it carried around in a little plastic bag on the tilt-a-whirl, and if you make it out of that alive, you know that you're not making it through the night. I don't think I had one goldfish that made it through the night.
Yeah, I mean, looking back now, I can't believe that I did that. I tried to win goldfish, but I guess I thought I could give them the best life possible. And
you were trying to rescue them.
And that comes from the rescue thing. I still do the rescue thing today, as you guys know. So it's just a thing with me. It's just kind of ingrained in me, and it was ingrained in my family growing up, and we always had it, to the point where how I found out I was allergic to cats is I rescued a kitten out of a gutter when I was 9 years old. It was like by itself down there, and my buddies and I just like got into this gutter and got this kitten, and I took it home. And my mom was like, well, we have to make sure the dogs like the kitten, of course, and they did. It slept on my face that night, and I woke up and my eyes were swollen shut. I thought I was blind. I was 9.
Oh.
You were
I'm
Mary
blind.
Ingalls.
I can't see. I was screaming.
You woke up as Mary Ingalls.
As who?
Mary Ingalls.
Oh, yeah.
Pa, I'm blind.
Yeah, I couldn't see. I thought, and you know, this is how much my mom loved animals. That cat lived for 20 years in our house. Yeah.
The "you let a pussy sleep on your face and regretted a" joke is killing me.
Oh no. You could
You can't cut this.
I had to cut that.
I'm just gonna.
I didn't hear half your story. As soon as I heard that, I was gone.
Chris is the adult in the room now officially.
I'm totally just.
I am so sorry. I just couldn't not share that, at least privately. All right, so at this point, I want to talk about what we've talked about and see if you guys can kind of put together, if you haven't already, where we were going with the title. And remember, we talked about Pop Rocks, Phil Collins, and a gerbil. When you hear Pop Rocks, what do you know, or what do you remember hearing about Pop Rocks?
Mikey.
Well, Pop Rocks supposedly the rumor
Mikey
that
died.
they killed Mikey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mikey died.
And Mikey
Pop Rocks.
died supposedly Pop Rocks and Coke, right? So there was that urban legend. How about Phil Collins? You mentioned the song "In the Air Tonight."
So these are urban legends. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
"In the Air Tonight" was like about the guy drowning, and
Yes.
you know,
Phil Collins witnessed.
Yes.
Gerbil's an urban legend.
Yes. So I hope.
Yeah.
So,
That's great. Urban legends.
listen, we lived in a time before we were connected by the internet. Before these were things that television couldn't even tell us. These weren't stories shared on the radio. And yet, you're in Pennsylvania. Did you grow up in Florida?
I grew up in Baltimore.
Okay, in Baltimore. I was in Rochester. All of us heard so many of these urban legends. Mikey and Pop Rocks, Richard Gere and the Gerbil, Phil Collins witnessing somebody drowning and somebody watching and not doing anything about it. And the guy supposedly was invited to come to the concert and sat in the front row. And then Phil Collins sang the song looking right at him. We all heard these stories. We heard whether it was Rod Stewart or sometimes the actual person that they talk about changes, but he collapsed in the middle of a concert and was rushed to the hospital where they pumped a certain substance out of his stomach. Supposedly gallons and gallons of it, depending on where you heard the story. There were so many of these that circulated, and I don't know how they got from one town to the next, but we have all heard some of these.
Yeah.
There was spider eggs in either Hubba Bubba or Bubble Yum. That was a big
Yes.
one.
Yeah.
The spider eggs. And then remember Three Men and a Baby? And the ghost.
Yes,
the ghost.
3 Men and a Baby.
Yeah.
The ghost. That was I mean, you could see that one, but yeah, those were all urban legends.
Even the razor blades in an apple on Halloween. Like I was reading on Snopes that there were no actual confirmed cases of that. Or LSD on, my mom wouldn't let us use the tattoos that came in the Cracker Jack box because there was an urban legend that somebody was dropping LSD onto those stickers.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I had, I even think about like Black Aggie and Bloody Mary, those ones where you would like say it into the mirror and then they would show up. And it was either 3 times, I think, and we would get to twice.
3 times.
Like, I can't do it. Like, I can't. Yeah. Those were like fun urban legends as well that scared us also. And, like these things were passed down, just like stories were passed down back in the day. And it's pretty cool to have this. There's a great slasher film named Urban Legends. If you've never
I've
watched
seen
it.
it. Jared Leto, maybe?
Yeah.
I think Jared Leto might have been in that.
You know, we couldn't look up anything in the day. So some of those legends stuck for like people still believe them years and years later. Well, did you know and that's where they came along. Do you remember they?
Yeah.
They always
they
said something. Who's they? But they say that there's spider eggs in bubble gum, and they always knew this stuff.
Yeah.
And
I always remember that the spiders would lay eggs in your cheek, or that, those stories too. All of those came around. And you never felt so cool as a young kid as being armed with one of these stories because your cousin visited from another town, or there was a new kid at school, or somebody relayed this information to you and you were the one holding it, and you got to go to the cafeteria and share it, or you got to sit in the back of the bus and share it. Whenever we were the one I never felt more cool than when I was the one being able to share the story.
Yeah, very true. And Candyman was another movie that was based on an urban legend as well. Like, that you say the Candyman, he shows up.
Yeah, I remember Candyman was actually a pretty decent movie.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, remembering this years ago, last time.
For what they were.
What's
Say
that?
it again?
So for what they were, right? These movies today, as we're recording this, it's Friday the 13th. Nobody will ever say that the Friday the 13th movies were these great works of art, but I loved every single one of them. I loved Candyman. I loved Urban Legends. I loved Final Destination. It was just that I loved those movies.
There was a movie about the sewer alligator, and I swear I didn't go to the back. I looked where I was going.
Another urban legend, though.
Ages, because I thought it was coming up through the toilet to bite my
Yeah.
room. So
I forgot that was another urban legend, though, that somebody somewhere was giving away baby alligators, and so many people flushed them down the toilet that the sewers of New York City were filled with gators because of it. I'd forgotten that one, but I heard that too.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, I know we're going to wrap up. You're going to wrap up for us here, but I have one more question to throw out at you guys. Stay on this urban legend thing for a second and take a different take. Cryptozoology. I love cryptozoology. It's the science of Bigfoot, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster. If any of those could, you would think could potentially be real, which one do you think would be most likely to actually be around? It doesn't have to be one of those big three, but something that you've heard that's a legend like that.
Like aliens, the kind of the alien, the classic picture with the big eyes kind of a thing. I just never say no to nothing. Whatever is out there, I think the whole world is a mystery. And I think we use a lot of urban legends sometimes to explain something that might have had a measure of truth to it. But in the end, it becomes, passed down and then it gets exploded. But, you look back at anything and there was probably some measure of truth to all kinds of things in the past. And, so I don't know.
I would say I would agree that all three of those at some point had something that originated them. I think something was in Loch Ness at some point. We grew up with shows like In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy that expanded our minds, and every one of those shows would focus on In Search Of Bigfoot, In Search Of the Loch Ness Monster. And, they would turn the absurd into possible. And that's why we believe these urban legends that maybe kids today, to Rochelle's point from earlier, they look it up on Snopes or whatever and are immediately able to dismiss it. We weren't so readily able to dismiss it. We allowed space in our lives for the improbable, if not the impossible. So to answer your question, I'd say I thought all three growing up probably had some level of truth to it. So now as we're wrapping up, we're coming up against our hour. Did you guys see it coming? Like you alluded immediately when I said gerbil, the Snickers, but did you guys see the connectivity throughout? Did you in any way know where we were going?
I get so wrapped up in enjoying the conversation with the two of you, by the way, that I sometimes am just so focused on that moment. I'm not thinking of that larger connection. I hope that our listeners are actually taking what we say, but I'm just sitting here conversing with the two of you and absolutely loving it.
Well, thanks. And I had no clue until you said until it was the second piece, until at the end here when you mentioned Phil Collins and you started kind of prodding along, pushing
I
along.
thought you were
then I
on to
was
me
like, okay,
because
wait a minute.
you were the first to snicker about the gerbil, and you were the first to name In the Air tonight. So I'm like, he's on to me. He's got me.
You guys think I'm the adult in the room, and I'm actually the child. But you
I
guys
didn't
No,
think we
you're
were
the-
going to talk about pets. I was thinking it was going to be something like we're going to talk about the gerbil and the glass tube. I mean,
And we did. In the end, we kind of did. And that's kind of what we do every week is take our memories of the past that we all have, all of us listeners and those of us here alike. We have these communal memories that we share, and we have our perspectives on it. And there's so much of the things that we remember that seemingly are unconnected, and yet we all share them, and they touch on each other in so many amazing ways. All right, so final thoughts. I'll start with you, Rochelle.
when I think backwards of some of these things and looking in that rearview mirror of my past, and then it reminds me today of how much and how far things like the internet and new technology have brought us. And I love taking a look backwards at the innocence. It's almost like before technology, we had an innocence that when you look back at it, we believed a lot of things and it gave us smiles. To be able to look backwards into that mirror and then realize how far we've come and still find joy in the simplicity of the past, I cannot think of anything better than that.
Nice. Agreed. 100%. Chris?
Yeah, I think for today's episode, I think about the lack of mystery that we have today. And, I'm kind of, in some ways, it's great for these kids growing up, and it's great for us because they can discover our pop culture at the click of a button. And we were unable to do that. We had to ask people, but that was actually a good thing because we interacted with people. And I think the mystery that we had with these urban legends, not really knowing if they were true, not being able to actually find out. There was no way for us to really find out. And those stories grew. It's just like Ferris, Ferris when he skipped school and it just exploded into this thing where he needed like donations for a kidney and all this crazy stuff. And I think there's some romanticism in mystery. And I'm still fascinated by 90% of the Congo being unexplored, how we don't know 90% of what's in the ocean. Like, this is fascinating to me. I love the idea of mystery. And I hope that these younger generations hold on to that because it's so easy for them to find the answers now.
And so that brings us up. We are out of time. I just want to say once again, thank you to our amazing sponsor, Do You Remember? Home of nostalgia that we all love so much. And if you happen to have an organization or a group that'd like to sponsor either one, two, or all three of our segments, reach out and let us know. So for me and for Shell and for Chris, thank you all so much. We'll see you next time.